Hey there, guys. All right, today we are watching a channel that I don't think I have reacted to yet, which is crazy to me because I would watch this channel like when it was new, like back when I was in like high school, I think was when they started. Um, and so I'm surprised I never reacted to this channel here. But this is a video on how do German schools teach World War II by today I found out. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. Would love to join the Discord, follow me over Twitch, and please do go check out the two gaming channels here on YouTube. One is for edited content, and then the other is for the stream VODs. Now to the video. I don't know how this will do because I've never reacted to this channel before. And I myself have not watched this channel in a really long time. So I don't quite know what to expect here anymore. I'm going to assume quality. I'm going to go in with hopefulness that they provide good amount of information. But we'll see. Let's dive in.
After World War II, the German state was utterly destroyed. It was split in four parts, and to top it all, coming face to face with the scale of the atrocities their government and armies committed through public events like the Nuremberg trials. This, in combination with the process of denazification, which can be seen as a large-scale rehabilitation program, and the regaining of independence, albeit as two states, helped the German people.
Oh man, rehabilitation. It works. Maybe we should apply that to other areas of our society.
In the 50s to begin looking towards the future, burying the past. It was not just a lost war, which people can accept while still feeling proud about their deeds during it, as perhaps the French used to view Napoleon's efforts, which ended in defeat, or Austria's defeats in the 7 Years' War. Rather, in this case, the sensation after the war seems to have been similar to a person regaining their senses after having committed acts of violence under the influence, akin to a crowd cheering for a football team or other such instances of mob mentality, which all humans are susceptible. Naturally, given all the revelations after the war and the atrocities committed, the Germans collectively wanted nothing more than to forget and focus on new goals. First the economy, which led to the German economic miracle, and then on the foundation of the European Union, of which in the coming decades it would arguably become the leading country. But what about the history books in school? After all, typical after any conflict, whether a given side is the winner or the loser, the history taught in schools tends to be coloured to favour one's own people. This, however, could not happen in Germany.
Yes. Yes. I will say I am not a fan of history is written by the victors, that line. No. 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 It really isn't. Not like it oh man, it's hard to like obviously here's the thing about that. It is such a nice little phrase, right? It is very succinct. It gets a point across so effectively. Obviously, the reality is very different from that, but there's no really better term as an alternative. I don't know how else to really describe how history really is, right? It's, I mean, yes, like was just said, written tends to favor one's own people. Um, and yeah, I mean that one's true, entirely true, right? But like Roman history, we like yeah, a lot of our primary sources come from the sources that have survived are Roman. Um, but even through the lens of Roman authors, historians are able to see the language used, right? Because historians also understand language and how the like in order to analyze old sources, you have to have a good understanding of language, translation, etc., right? Like if I were to pursue a master's in history and specifically on Anglo-Saxon history, I would have to know, I would have to be able to myself at least when I very briefly looked into programs, because I at one point was considering it. I'm not at all anymore. I'm never gonna get, never pursue history further than a bachelor's. Um, they they were like, need to know, I would need to be able to uh translate Anglo-Saxon and Latin myself, right? I would need to know those languages to a certain degree, right? Like I wouldn't need to be like fluent or probably even like proficient. I could probably be passable at like an amateur grasping of both those languages, right? Because there are just so many books on those two languages. But like, anyways, getting back to my point of what I'm trying to say, historians can look at the way in which words are used to describe a thing and can go off from there and make insinuations. Now, of course, is insinuations perfect methodology? No, but it's like they're educated guesses. They're the best we have, right? Um, like historians, yeah, they don't like. It's just I don't know how to word this, and it's frustrating. Moving on.
Germany. The reasons for this were varied, from making sure something like that couldn't happen again, and of course the scale of the atrocities on a global level and the small time gap that separates us from those events and how well documented those events are. This brings us to the broad strokes of how this particular conflict was and is taught in German schools. We should point out here that in Germany the education system is regulated not by the federal government but independently in each of the 16 states that constitute the German Federal Republic, or BRD. So the way history is taught, although generally falling within the same lines, can vary a lot from region to region. For example, the choice of literature used in the various classes differs greatly, not only from year to year, but also from federal state to federal state. That caveat out of the way, the study of the war period and how this is
Man, I wish the United States was like that, where specifically in the English curriculum, um, back in middle school and high school, where the books would vary more year to year. It's not like that. I could probably ask a 14-year-old, so 11-year age difference, right? Um, and ask them, what books are you reading for your freshman English class? I can I have a 95% certainty that they would say the same books that I had read, which is not how it should be. One, the books that I had to read my freshman year should not have been books that I had to fucking read. Like, they literally the only ones that I believe should be um there. I'm fine with Shakespeare being taught. I think Shakespeare should be taught because of it both can be used. Shakespeare can be a good way of both teaching poetry and analyzing story, right? So you can cover multiple things that you need to teach in an English class just by looking at Shakespeare. And you can also make Shakespeare fun. There are so many, right? Shakespeare has the most adaptations out of fucking any writer, right? Um, there are plenty to choose from. You can teach Shakespeare, and the class will have fun, right? Like I remember, we were reading through Romeo and Juliet. What our teacher did to make it fun was this is. I'm just going off about the education system, and not really at all about the German education system. This is just triggering my like fight response to how shitty the US education system is. But right, my freshman English teacher, the class we read Shakespeare for, Romeo and Juliet specifically, she would have us like now there were some chapters we had to read on our own time just to stay on track, right, for the curriculum. But we would also spend time um reading like a chapter or two in class, but we would like perform it to a certain degree, right? She would pick out some people who volunteered to stand up in class and be the characters, right? And like that worked. That got the kids involved. They enjoy it because like even the popular kids want to like they'll participate in that because like they think it's funny, right? No kid will take it seriously, the performing part seriously, but they'll still have fun, right? Like, um, and then another book, though I'm most certainly biased, is I think The Hobbit should be required reading in schools. Um, just because I fucking love The Hobbit. I mean, it's also a great book and it's an easy read and it's a very short read as well. So like, I think it's a great book as well to use. And also it right like personally the English curriculum should be teaching multiple genres, right? It shouldn't just be like, contemporary fiction or whatever, which is like right like To Kill a Mockingbird. What's that one shitty book? Um it's got that depressed teenager from like the 1950s, I think. I hated that book. That book sucks ass. Catcher in the Rye. Fuck that book. That book sucks ass. Um and the 1920s book that I forget the name of. That one's all those To Kill a Mockingbird. I could be argued should be taught because of also the historical stuff happening within the book. But like Catcher in the Rye and then the other one that I'm forgetting the name of, I don't think those need to be fucking taught at all. Those just eh, there's not they're like they don't. I mean, I guess the one from the 1920s, or well, that is set in the Roaring Twenties, could be taught because right, the English teachers can also use it as a moment to talk about 1920s American culture. But fuck Catcher in the Rye. Anyways, back to the video. I got distracted again.
Viewed in German schools can be generally divided into four parts. The first, the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic, at least its beginnings, are generally viewed positively. It is seen as a first decent effort towards democratization, despite the problems that it faced in the aftermath of World War I. The various problems culminating in the economic crisis of the late 20s and the subsequent rise of the Nazi regime are dealt with in detail, emphasizing the mistakes that would lead to the fall of the democratic system. One would say that the Weimar Republic, despite the brevity of its existence, is viewed with a certain nostalgic sentiment accompanied by the looming threat of what was to come. And that is not just the war, but the Nazis themselves and their ideology. Nazi ideology and atrocities. Head on, the students are confronted with the crushing effects of totalitarian regimes, radical ideologies, and where these can lead. In addition to photo and video documentaries, most schools organize mandatory school trips to Holocaust memorials, usually former concentration camps. This does not only apply to history class. Students are also introduced to the works of
Oh man. Yeah, I will. I don't. Oh man, going to actually an actual Holocaust camp. Oh, that's a tough one. That's a tough because like I'm curious if anyone here is German or has like been a part of German education system. At what age do you first like do you go to a concentration camp? Like I'm assuming you don't go until like high school. I feel like younger and that's could be a very tough thing for like I mean, and not in the sense of like emotionally difficult for the kids. I think it's more so that the younger than high school, the kids just aren't going to be really able to truly grasp the weight of what they are experiencing, what they are seeing in a way. Um like for me, I remember in one of my high school history classes, I can't remember, I think it was for my freshman history class. I don't think it was for my sophomore. Um Or was it for sophomore? I think it actually might have been for sophomore. But anyways, we went to a in my state there is a, I think, a pretty famous actually Holocaust museum. Um so we took a field trip to that Holocaust museum. And I've told this story before on this channel because I've talked about how they had one of the fucking like train carts that was used to ship Jews to the concentration camps. And we were like, okay, yeah, I think this was sophomore year because it was just my class, which was a AP European history class, and then the other AP European history class. There were two AP Euro classes. And I think in total we numbered maybe like 30 to 35 people, maybe less, went on that trip. I can't remember. But they had us all stand in that train cart. Just 30 to 35 of us. And we felt cramped. And then they would tell us, yeah, so like they would fit like stuff even more people in here, or I can't remember the exact number. But they would put way more people than 35 people in a singular fucking cart, right? And so that always stuck with me. And I think definitely at the high school age, it is a good thing to go and see that stuff because that's when you can really start to finally like grasp the weight of it and like understand it. Like just understand. I don't know a better way to express it than just using the word understand. um, get the weight of what you are experiencing. Um, uh, but man, is it fucking depressing. Like our now I had an amazing teacher for that, right? And also the museum, if I'm remembering correctly, is designed really well, right? So it goes through the very depressing stuff, right? You go through some very depressing stuff. And then at the end, I believe the last bit that you walk through is a more has a more hopeful message, I think. Like it goes beyond the war, right? The after. And then if I'm remembering it correctly, it was more hopeful. And then we also went and got like lunch somewhere after, a more cheerful thing to do. Like she made a point of we went somewhere that would be like a good time after that depression. Um, so I'm curious how they handle like going there. Um, because like that is something that I think needs to be like delicate, just because like it's just a such a weighty, heavy, depressing thing, and you definitely want it to be at that right moment where everyone can like actually grasp, or well, the most amount of people of the class, right? The most make it the most effective. It right. I think going any sooner than high school is kind of not useful, at least in an educational from an educational standpoint. Like if families themselves want to go, yeah, go for it. But like from an educational standpoint, I don't know. I'm just rambling.
Of literature tackling the issue of Nazism and ethnic hate in Europe at the time. This can include, but is not limited to, authors such as Bertolt Brecht and Thomas Mann. Additionally, Jewish voices are amplified in terms of Jewish poetry, reports from survivors, and historical documentaries focusing on the long-term consequences of hate and violence. Some of the literature choices indicate that the schools try to emphasize the aspects of humanity and also the problem of group mentality and prejudice, as seen in works such as the post-war play Andorra by Max Frisch, and more recent works such as The Boy in the Striped Pajamas from 2006 by John Boyne and The Reader by Bernhard Schlink. They also look at the diaries of Anne Frank. Excerpts of pro-Nazi text.
I remember reading Anne Frank. That was 8th grade. I go back and forth on whether or not like we should have read Anne Frank at that age, just because like again, especially as a middle school boy in America, and I can only really speak on the American perspective and how middle school boys would be. I don't think we should have been reading Anne Frank just because at the we are not yet at the emotional maturity level to really grasp what we are reading, right? Like, I look back on reading Anne Frank and I don't really remember anything. I don't remember, right? Like, I can confidently say I did not get out of reading Anne Frank what you are probably supposed to be getting from an educational standpoint out of Anne Frank's diary, right? I think in high school would have been more effective, you know? But an eighth grade middle school boy, no.
Also studied once the students are deemed mature enough to handle this. In this vein, excerpts
Okay, yeah.
from Mein Kampf are tackled in advanced history class, stressing the contradictions within the text, what contemporary citizens might have identified with, and the lack of morality therein. Interestingly, as if to complement Nazi ideology with a similar type of prejudice, the other major topic focused on intensely is that of slavery, racism, and segregation in America. The war itself.
I think that's actually a really good way of handling it. Like, yeah, talking about, American slavery, prejudice, like, right? Because I think one of the things that could be risky with this, right, is and like one of the problems that it could have on the youth if they are just being exposed to heavy critique of the actions of their people's past, because also, right, World War II only ended like 70 some years ago. Um, that is relatively close familial relations of people being involved. So to then be very heavy on um the mistakes of the nation's past, that runs the risk, I feel, of sending kids down like the alt-right pipeline because they will be looking for the validation of we're not we're not so evil, right? Or like we're not bad or whatever, right? Like that pipeline is a very slippery slope. That's usually where it kind of starts. Um from the sort of like political aspect sort of way. Um for lack of a better phrase off the top of my head. So I think to then incorporate, right, the mistakes of the United States, right, the slavery of the USA, the atrocities the United States and the colonial powers have committed, what I think that does is that helps alleviate and showcase like the world is fucked up. Every nation has its demons and are in the process of trying to figure out ways to make up for it. Again, for lack of a better term, right? Like we have movements inside the U.S. of people trying to find ways to make up for slavery or try and like give some apologies, reparations to the indigenous tribes of America, right? So I think that definitely helps a young person's, like perspective there to get that balance of, hey, we're not the only ones that have a lot of shit in their history. Um, Here's another one, and also it runs along similar themes of of Nazism and stuff like that. Man, am I yapping a lot today?
Remarkably, the details of the fields of war are often underplayed in German schools. A possible reason for this is that showing maps of expanding German territory during the first 2 years of the war and discussing their winning battles might cause encouragement of nationalistic pride, which seems counterproductive to many given the points that educators are trying to teach. Furthermore, the
That's fair.
discussion of the details of each battle that Rommel won or lost in Africa, or the supply problems on the Eastern Front, are not vital to the analysis of the atrocities
I mean, yeah, that's also not taught in American schools at all. Um, yeah, no, fucking war isn't taught, and I don't think it really should be taught. Hear me out. not in the battles. The battles are unimportant. Right? It's the themes, the reasons for the war being fought, and then like the feelings of the people are what are important. The war itself is not important.
Of the Nazi regime. Another more practical aspect is that already much time has been allocated to the subject of war anyway, so they cut down on the actual battles. Of course, one downside of de-emphasizing this is many German students are never really made aware of many specific military events and conquests, since most emphasis in school is put on the internal developments, theoretical or philosophical aspects, and of course on the ideology and practice of ethnic cleansing and the ruthlessness to other groups of people seen as ethnic, cultural, or political outcasts, such as Jews, homosexuals, communists, etc. The result is that the military developments of war are understated, as alluded to. The result is that, shockingly, many German students are actually surprised to learn things like that Germans invaded places like modern Ukraine, modern Serbia, and Greece. In contrast to these broader war strokes, resistance against the Nazi regime within Germany is heralded as an example of heroism and bravery, one such example being the siblings Sophie and Hans Scholl, members of the resistance group the White Rose. Such examples allow German students to find figures from the wartime with whom they can identify with.
Another thing similar, like essentially I would just be reiterating. Yeah, that's the way to do it.
On this note, not every regular German who lived in the 1930s and 40s is painted as a terrible person. After all, when dealing with such a large group, as in any populace, there are plenty of good people and a percentage of bad. That said, given all that happened, a large emphasis is put on even most of the good people being complicit in the atrocities by looking away and not doing anything to stop it. Defeat and post-war.
As they should be, right? Like, yeah. We should be able to look at the people of the past and be like, hey, this person, here's what they did. They did not speak out. Like,
The major
yeah.
destructions in Germany and the high cost of human lives during the war is not attributed to the Allies, but rather to the Nazi regime itself, which is being viewed as the perpetrator in starting an unnecessary war in the first place.
Yep.
Furthermore, most of the destruction on German soil was inflicted in the last year of the war. The obstinacy of not surrendering, even as it was clear that the outcome of the war would be negative, is seen as proof of the minimal care the Nazis expressed toward their own people. The suicide of members of the party, such as Himmler and Hitler himself, is seen as an act of cowardice on their part. Thus, rather unique in history, the opposing forces who were victorious are not generally seen in a negative light by those they defeated.
I'm so curious. If there's one what if, is I want to know what would have. I really want a what if Hitler hadn't killed himself and had like allowed himself to be captured. Obviously, probably be captured by the Soviets. I'm curious how quickly they would have killed him. I don't think. I think. I think even the Americans might have shot him pretty quick. Like I don't. On either side, I don't. I think he would probably have a better chance at getting to trial and then executed in trial. If the Allies had gotten to him, I think there's a good chance the Soviets might have just shot him dead on sight. Honestly, like if he's going through like the process of like surrendering, right, and he isn't gonna try and do like a one of those like you know, where he tries to like last stand or whatever, right? He's actively surrendering. He's got his hands in the air, no weapons on him. I kind of believe the Soviets would have just shot him dead anyway. On the spot, on site. The Americans, I feel like the Allies, not just the Americans, the Allies in general. I think there would have been. Oh, I can't really say. I think I think there might have been maybe some people in like the Allied troops, like going back and forth, and then like a commander, an officer or whatever, saying no, we have to do our job or whatever. He has to like that sort of. I don't know. I'm just what if scenario in my head. that I'm curious about.
Far from it. On that note, the occupation of the German cities by the Allied army is characterized as liberation. This is despite, of course, the fact that the Allied soldiers at the time didn't seemingly view the race to Berlin as a race to free Berlin. The choice of words, however, comes with the emphasis that by losing the war, the German people were freed from Nazism. An interesting example comes from alternative history broadcasts that contemplate a world after supposed German victory. These paint a horrific dystopia in which the Germans, as well as the occupied people, would be suppressed by a ruthless Nazi regime. The 8th of May is therefore known as the Day of Liberation. Making parallels to the way the European Renaissance supposedly liberated the medieval people, the liberation as well as the denazification process led to an internal catharsis among Germans concerning Nazism. Reflecting all of this in popular German cinema, German war films, especially in the last few decades, tend to deal with the subject with honesty, showing the gradual shift to madness caused by hollow masked illusions, often in a tone more fatalistic than heroic. Therefore, they can be much deeper than a typical war movie, and if you're up for that, you might enjoy work such as the Generation War miniseries. There's also the movie The Fall, perhaps mostly known thanks to the most meme-ified Hitler scene ever. Of course, one
Yeah, that's honestly some of my that's probably the first meme memory that I have is looking up fucking videos of that of people fucking I don't know. Yeah.
movie The Fall, perhaps mostly known thanks to the most meme-ified Hitler scene ever. Of course, one major issue of all this in the way it's taught in schools and extreme emphasis placed on this period of history is the subject of imposed collective responsibility on modern Germans, even if just implied or felt rather than ever explicitly stated. At first glance, it is good to study these events in great detail to make sure they don't happen again. However, an issue for Germans, of course, is the sense of collective responsibility, despite no student today, or their parents, or even potentially their grandparents, having anything to do with any of that. How much weight does the idea of original sin have? How is a person born in the 2000s responsible for the Nazi atrocities? It is still heavily frowned upon to display the modern-day German flag, despite officially and explicitly not being a Nazi symbol. On a similar note, a nationalistic display
Yeah, I think that's definitely I agree with that being a problem for sure because it's a new development in hum in just being human, right? Like up until the modern age, we have never really had the desire to feel responsible for fighting each other, right? We have always historically fought one another, conquered another group of people, and even wiped them out without too much of a care, right? Um, w- at a certain point, we like honestly before, honestly probably pre, if we go 1800s and before. Now let's be general. Let's 1700s and earlier. Actually, really kind of just colonialism before. I keep pushing back the day. Um, the majority of human history, right? We have fought each other, conquered each other, killed each other, and wiped out other cultures, and never really like batted an eye at it. This is a new development in like I guess our empathy for one another as humans. I believe I see it as an advancement, right? As progression, as humans. Um, and so really, and Germany is kind of because the United States was supposed to do reparations for the freed blacks in post Civil War, but they never did it. Um, and so really, Germany became the first place to actively participate in the notion of collective responsibility. But because of that, right, they are also going to probably be the first people that need to figure out what is the end point. Because at a certain time, um, that the the way it is taught does kind of have to change at a certain point. Um, as you get further away from it. Like I think certainly in the first like 20 years here of the 21st century, and then also the 50 years, the last half of the 20th century. I think it was very good to have it taught the way it is. Um, but I think we are now reaching that point where we are so distanced from the events of World War II, where now the way it is taught has to be shifted a bit. Obviously, I am saying this as not a German. Oh, well, I am German descended, but not German German. My family left Germany in like the fucking 19th century. Um, so yeah, like it's it's something that Germany has to kind of figure out for themselves of like, is there an endpoint, and what does that look like, right? When do we not move? I don't know how to say it other than move on, but like essentially, how do we move past this point now? Um, and kind of get away from that feeling of collective responsibility, because also, as I mentioned earlier, that feeling of collective responsibility can push people towards the alt-right pipeline because of how slippery the slope is here, right? um Obviously, I think the majority of people fall towards the progressive side of things, of like accepting the past and not actually not actually feeling responsible themselves, right? And that's ultimately the way it should be. However, again, it's a slippery slope, and alt-right people will use certain language and phrases, and if someone is not like uh, educated really on um, that kind of terminology, it can be very easy for them to get sucked in, and to like believe in the words being spewed to them by the alt-right, right? Um, and so it's I don't know what the answer would be, what the solution could be, what the road to, you know, maybe making a more stable ground is, and not so slippery. But anyways, man, I fucking yapped.
Play such as pledging allegiance to the flag during class every
Oh,
morning
I
would
hate the
have
Pledge
the
of Allegiance.
worst possible connotations in Germany, despite being common in places like the United States. Furthermore, there is a high percentage of population with immigrant heritage. Just look at the German national football team. As you might expect from all of this, there is some concern that the German school systems may go too far with the seeming obsession with the Nazis and all the mistakes that they were making, instead of spending more time on broader history, as is more typical in other nations. Whatever one's
I do agree that perhaps probably oh mm, I go back and I can broader history versus spending time, like uh I go back and I don't know. I don't
opinion
know
on
my
that.
feelings on
As an
that one.
interesting
I
little
could see
side note,
both.
the German denazification process was considered such a success that decades later Americans sought to apply a same methodology after occupying Iraq. Unsurprisingly, that was not exactly successful. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did,
And that was how do German schools teach World War II. Today I found out. I yapped way more than I thought I would. This video just triggered my issues with the American education system, and I had to fucking spew it out. Um this was a decent video. Like, I definitely think it's a good video in the sense that it brings forth a lot. There are a lot of things to discuss coming out of this video. The necessary way it was kind of like said, I don't know, there's some phrasing in here that I wasn't like too much of a fan of that kind of deliberate phrasing of trying to be like not biased. There is no such thing as being unbiased. So like when you see something that is very clearly like trying to avoid showcasing a bias, it kind of, I don't know, it rubs me the wrong way a little bit. Um like I I'm someone that wants to hear like, okay, here are like, because again, everyone has a bias. There's always going to be a bias no matter what you consume. And so I kind of want that acknowledged by the people delivering information. And then, like, so they have a moment of, here are, you know, the facts as we have interpreted them, right? This is essentially what he has done, right? That is what we did. And then a moment at the end for them to explain perhaps their perspective uh, uh um on it. That's kind of what I want from like channels like this, for example. I'm not saying, right, like, again, this is a good video. It's just that is my personal taste for this kind of content that this channel makes. I think I explained that well. But oh my god, 40-minute video. Oh, I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.